Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson, founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering of the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about it, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that is teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Laurie Wallmark, and she has a pretty interesting background. She was a computer science professor and software engineer for many years, and now she's a children's book author. That makes perfect sense. I'm really interested to learn more about that transition from computers to children's books, and of course, how public speaking fits into all of it. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Laurie.
Oh, thank you for having me, Neil.
So from the little bit of research that I did on you, I saw that you got your degree in biochemistry. Where'd the interest in biochemistry come from?
As a kid, I always loved math and science, and I thought I'd be a math professor, a mathematician when I grew up, but I really liked applied math. Interestingly enough, no one encouraged me to go into engineering because back when I went to school, girls didn't go into engineering. So I chose the science route, and there was no science major at school. You couldn't just say, I want to major in science. So I did the next best thing. I chose biochemistry because then you needed biology, chemistry, physics, math, and of course, biochemistry.
I also noticed that you got a master's in information systems. Was that something that you'd always planned on doing or something that you kind of fell into?
I took a programming course the summer of 10th grade and really enjoyed computers. You have to remember, back then, there were no personal computers. Most people didn't know about computing. I went to college. There was no computer science department. The computer courses I took were in electrical engineering. So I really did like computing. And when it came to time to graduate, I had to choose, did I want science? Did I want computers? Science, computers. Luckily for me, there was a field called scientific computing, which is what I entered. But I realized I really needed to know more about computers. I didn't have enough background. So that's where the information systems came.
Oh, okay. And so, you graduate from school, you get these degrees, you work as in computers, even eventually you work as an adjunct in computers. Was the path to going down this, doing these jobs something that you would always, I guess that was always kind of planned because you got this degree in biochemistry, and typically, at least from my understanding, if you get a degree in biochemistry, you're going into medicine or something like that, but not you. You went into computers.
And indeed, of the other people in my department at school, everyone else went to med school, except one person who got a PhD in biochemistry.
Right.
But I knew I never wanted to be a lab chemist. I really didn't want to be a doctor. Computers were drawing me in. So I worked for a pharmaceutical company and did programming to help drug development and test drugs and things like that.
And then I also mentioned you ended up teaching as well. Was that something that you had planned on doing?
There was actually a step in between those two.
Okay.
And the step in between was I had a mail order catalog of books about adoption and infertility. I even had a bookstore on the web before Amazon did. So I did that one little side trip for about 10 years. And I always read the ads, the classified ads in papers. I still do, because you never know, there might be a job for you, a job for a friend. And I saw an ad to teach. And I thought, that might be interesting. I had never taught classes like that before, no experience. I don't know what made me think I could do teaching, but I applied and I learned on the job, shall we say.
So you also mentioned that there was for 10 years you had a bookstore on the web. So you went from working in computers to having a bookstore on the web. What was the motivation to even make that change?
That change came about because I was getting very tired of corporate America.
Okay.
And I wanted to do something on my own. I wanted to be an entrepreneur, start my own business. Loved reading. in addition to math and science as a kid, loved reading, still do. And so I thought books, that would be great, but I had to narrow it down. I couldn't just have every book alive. And so I went through, I called it starting with the A's. I thought of niche markets that I could do: adoption, abortion, grandparents. I wanted something to do with families because at the time I had young children at home, so that was an interest I had. I certainly didn't want anything to do with, say, sports, because you have to read a lot of books if you're selling them. And that's how I ended up with adoption. It seemed like the perfect market. These are people who are interested in family, who want to expand their family, and would be looking for resources.
What was
And
the
again, this was before it was easy to find those resources because there was no Amazon on the web.
what was the reason for, I guess, stopping the web, the bookstore on the web?
Someone emailed me asking if I wanted to sell the business. And at the time, it had never occurred to me. So I said no. But a year later, I'd been working out of my house and I had several employees. I was at the point where I was going to have to move out of the house, rent space, because I was running out of room. And I thought, maybe it's time to go on to the next chapter of my life. So I sold the business, and there you go.
So you had to move out of your house because of room for what? The employees or the books?
Oh, I had the books in my garage. I had books all over the place, but it was more room for employees to work.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see that. And so then when you worked as a professor, what kind of courses did you teach?
Okay, I taught a course called Computer Literacy. It was a mandatory course for all students, and it taught you about how computers work, hardware, software, networks, the internet, keeping safe on the internet. It also taught the Microsoft Office suite. I taught it to students on campus, and then I also taught it to students in prison who were going towards their associate's degree, because since it was a mandatory course, they had to take it in order to get the degree.
Wow. What differences did you find in teaching prisoners as opposed to, just regular students?
The students in prison, they had to apply to get into the course. They were much more motivated. They knew that if they didn't do the work, they could get kicked out of the program. So that was one big difference. Another big difference is some of them had never used a computer before. These were sometimes men who had been in for 25 years, so they had truly never used a computer before. They were starting at zero, as opposed to the students on campus who, of course, had all used computers all through school at this point. So very different.
I'm guessing there had to be a lot of more, I guess, remedial education for those type of prisoners that didn't use computers before, as opposed to the students outside who pretty much grew up with them.
Right. Oh, and another difference is they weren't allowed to use the computers except when I was there, unless they were taking another class that used computers. So they didn't have a chance to do the kind of practice you need to really get proficient. So they really worked hard. I gave these same tests both to the students in prison and the students on campus. And in general, the ones in prison scored higher.
Interesting. They scored higher even though they had less access to computers.
Right, because they would take that book and they would look at it and they would, how do I do this? They'd read over and over again. This is how you do this. This is how you do that. They knew that when they got out, they needed those computer skills to do anything. So like I said, they were so much more motivated. Now, many of the on-campus students were motivated too, don't get me wrong, but some were just there, marking time.
Yeah, I can see that. You would happen to know the outcome of the ones that went through the program in prison. What kind of jobs did they end up getting?
I wish I knew. My guess is not very good jobs, because it's hard to get a job after you've been in prison.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. When you first said that you were teaching prisoners, I just assumed that it was online, but you
No,
actually went into the prison. Were you ever, I guess, worried about your safety going into a prison?
I was never worried, but I got caught in lockdowns several times. And when, for example, one day the lights flickered, any sort of interruption in the power means the men had to go immediately back to their cells. And that takes a lot of time to get them all back to the cells. They all have to be counted. And there I was waiting in my classroom because I couldn't go anywhere until they were all counted. Or in one case, I was at a women's prison, and the day of the final, there was a lockdown. So I was there with no students. They hadn't even come. The lockdown happened after I arrived, but before they left their cells. And again, you're there for hours while they're making sure that everything is okay. But no, I actually never really felt concerned. The men especially were so appreciative and so careful around me. If it, let's say it's snowing outside, they'd say, be careful driving home, Professor Wallmark, things like that. They really cared.
Hmm. Did you notice any differences between male and female prisoners?
Yes, the female prisoners, they'd get into class and they'd all be, hi, 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 how are you? How are you? Not to me even, but to each other. The men, they'd come in and there they were.
Got it. All right. So at some point, you decide to write your first children's book. What was the motivation for that?
I've always loved reading middle grade novels. These are novels for kids, say, 10 to 14 years old, 8 to 12, something like that. And one day I had an idea and I thought, I'll give it a try. I had not been a writer as a kid. I didn't keep a diary or a journal. I wrote a few poems, wrote a few songs, and that was it. So I took a bunch of classes, read a bunch of books, wrote my novel. No one bought it. And I thought, okay, I tried. I'm not a writer. 5 years later, I had another idea for another middle grade novel. Took more courses, read more books, wrote the next novel. No one bought that one either. But the difference this time is I wasn't just waiting. I was starting to write other things like picture books. And from then on, I was on my way.
What are the topics of your children's books?
The ones that have been published so far and the next one coming out are about women in STEM. That's science, technology, engineering, and math. These are picture book biographies of women whose accomplishments have been overlooked or stolen by other people. And I wanted to show children, not just girls, but girls and boys, that anyone can be a scientist or a mathematician. And by telling these stories, they could see that. So I have 4 books out now. I have one coming out in March called Codebreaker Spy Hunter, about a cryptographer. And then I have just a regular old fiction picture book coming out called Dino Pajama Party. Talk about something completely different.
Okay. Well, I commend you for writing books that are, I guess the goal of them is to encourage boys and girls to consider careers in STEM. I wrote a
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wrote a book a couple years ago for that same reason, and I certainly don't regret it. It's definitely it's something that's needed because if you look in certain fields within STEM, it seems to be pretty stacked with certain type of person,
To
and
put it mildly.
right, and to try to kind of figure out why that is. I mean, I don't really know, but it doesn't have to be that way. If there are people out there that think that they can or aspire to go into certain fields, then they need to know that there's not anything that's off limits to them.
it breaks my heart to know that there are fewer women now in computer science than when I was in it, when I graduated. So you're talking 45 years later, and the number of women has gone down instead of up.
Huh, imagine that. So when it comes to your books, do you go through a publisher or do you self-publish?
I use a traditional publisher, so I've been with several publishers. I have an agent. The agent sends the book out to the publisher or publishers, and eventually someone says, yes, this is the book we want to buy, we want to bring out. And I choose to go the traditional publishing route because, especially with picture books, then you're paired with an illustrator, a fantastic illustrator in my case. They've all been amazing. You have editors. If people knew how much editing goes on, how many decisions the publisher and you are making about your book, it's amazing. And then, of course, they have the ability to get the books out to everyone.
How do you decide what publisher to go with?
That's a decision between my agent and me. Sometimes it's more editors actually than publishers. Choosing editors that we think would be open to a specific book that we're sending around.
And also, when it comes to you finally finish the book, and then it comes time to let people be aware of it to market the book. What type of strategies do you do to make that happen?
We could have an hours and hours long discussion about that. Until recently, I would do things like go to book festivals where I'd be there and I could be meeting kids, talking to them. I do school visits, same thing, meeting kids, talking to them. I'd speak at professional conferences like English teachers, math teachers, science teachers, librarians, introducing them to my books so that they could introduce the books to their students. That obviously has all changed. What I'm doing now is a lot of what I'm doing right now is online interviews, videos. There's something called Nerd Camp. And in person, Nerd Camp gets together educators and authors to exchange ideas and information. So I've done 3 online nerd camps, 6 or 7 panels on those nerd camps on talks like biography or writing nonfiction, encouraging children to be interested in STEM. It's much easier in person than it is online.
Yeah, I would assume so. From your previous life working in computers and even as a professor, does that inform your writing in any way?
That's an interesting question. In a way it did, because the first 2 women in STEM I wrote about were computer scientists. That was my field of expertise, my field of interest. So I started with what I knew and then expanded out from there. Other than that, no, I don't think it really, because I was teaching adults, if I were teaching first graders, it would influence it a lot.
Yeah, okay. When it comes to public speaking, is that something you've always been good at? And if not, what'd you do to get better at it?
I'm pausing because am I good at public speaking? I like to think I am. I get asked to do public speaking. I've given keynote addresses, so I guess other people must think I'm okay at public speaking. I think the best thing you can do is practice. But I did also join Toastmasters for a while, which is an organization that helps you with public speaking. Luckily for me, I'm not nervous public speaking, so I don't have that whole problem going on that a lot of people do. I get up there. I tend to cram a lot of stuff into my public speaking. It's not that I talk fast, I don't dilly-dally along the way. I give the information that people can use. I'm not sure that really answered your question.
No, no, it certainly did. And even if it didn't, it's not as though I was going to tell you it didn't. That'd be kind of rude, don't you think?
Good point.
It's like you missed it completely.
Right.
Who says that?
La, 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 la.
Do you have a process for putting your presentations together? And if so, what is it?
Outline. Just like I outline my picture books, I outline my presentation. And then from there, I fill in the outline. I usually, depending upon what I'm speaking about, I often actually write out the presentation. It depends. If it's something that's very hands-on or something I've done many times before, I don't write it out, but I often write it out. And then we're back to practice. Practice, practice, practice. That's the way it becomes smooth. That way you don't have to look at your notes that much. So I'll have my outline with me so I don't miss anything important. But I like it to just flow.
Yeah, for sure. So I know you mentioned putting an outline together when putting your speeches together, which is important. The importance of practicing when it comes to presentations as well. Do you have any other tips that could help someone in becoming more effective as a public speaker?
I think also to calm down and enjoy yourself. Because I know so many people who are scared of public speaking, and as children's book writers, people tend to be introverts, which I actually am. So getting out in front of people makes them afraid, and I understand that. So calming down, whatever method is your preferred method of getting calm, deep breaths, meditation, taking some time before you get out there, realizing that even if you misstate things, which I've done, I've stumbled a few times here in this interview, it's okay. You can just continue on. Everyone misstates things and everyone stumbles. But most importantly, the people who are there to hear you want to hear you. No one's forcing them to hear you. Well, I guess in the case of children, they're being forced to hear you. But when you're speaking to adults, they're coming to it by choice. They want the information that you have, and you're an expert in your field. You're an expert in whatever you're talking about. You do know more than most of the people in the audience. So just calm down and go with it.
One question I had about your books. So when it comes to the illustrations that the illustrator provides, is that something that you negotiate between the two of you, or are they the sole, I guess, the decision maker in what the illustrations will be?
In general, in picture books, the author has no say. For whatever reason, probably because they were nonfiction, I've had a lot of input. And especially in the cases like my Hedy Lamar's Double Life, where there's a lot of science in the illustrations with waveforms. I had to sketch out illustrations, which was quite hysterical because I have the artistic talent of a turnip. So a ship, a battleship, would look like a little sailboat on the sea, and a submarine looked like a UFO had landed underneath the water. But it was enough to be able to show the illustrator what needed to be in the illustrations. Again, I feel like I've been very lucky because I've gotten to see all the sketches, all the final art, give feedback. Doesn't mean they're going to take my feedback, but often they do.
Interesting.
But that is not always the case.
So
and even with my fiction picture book, they let me do it. So I don't know how to answer that question because I've always been told that you have no input into the illustrations, and I've always, so.
So is that the case for the editing as well?
The editing you have absolute control over. The words, they'll make suggestions, and you can take the suggestions or leave them. But once they bought the book, But chances are their suggestions, editors are good. Editors really know what they're doing, and their suggestions tend to be sort of like, why didn't I think of that?
What
In
about the
one of
title?
my books, in one of my books, I have a poem. Well, in two of them, I have a poem in the front of the book. And in one of them, the editor made a suggestion for a change in one of the lines. It's like, really, why didn't I think of that? Of course, that makes much more sense. Editors are amazing people, but you do, with the words, you have the final word, so to speak.
What about with the title? Do you have final say on the title as well?
No. And that comes into a lot with marketing, because they'll run the title by people at Amazon, they'll run the title by people at Barnes and Noble, they'll run the cover by people at Amazon and Barnes and Noble. So, no. If I totally hated a title, maybe they reconsider, but probably not, because it's marketing.
Interesting. So you have, well, at least up until this point, you've had some say over the illustrations and then also the editing, not the title. But
Right.
is that I guess it obviously can't be an issue for you since you still go the publishing route.
You make a good point, and that's one of the reasons that some people choose to self-publish, because they want to make sure they have the final word over everything. And I'm willing to trust other professionals. They know more than I do. I may not always agree, but they do know more than I do.
This has been a really interesting conversation, learning more about you, Laurie. I mean, it's not every day you speak to someone who worked in software and then decides to become a full-time children's book author. So thank you for just taking time to speak with me. Are there anything that other things that you would want others to know about? Things that you're working on?
No, just that our little secret club of people who used to be software engineers and are now children's book authors is growing. I meet more and more people who have made that switch. So it's unusual. I think we're up to 5 or 6 of our secret club. I think the biggest thing I'd want people to know, and you now know, is you don't need to have one career for your entire life. I've had 4. Who knows? I may have 5 by the time I'm done. And some were related, some are unrelated. Some are book related, some are science related, but you don't have to choose. So I think that's the biggest takeaway.
Yeah, I commend people like you, Laurie, that don't see those type of, I guess, barriers. Some people they'll start off with something and think that they have to continue with that, forever. But someone like yourself, you did one thing and then you did something. You just basically you followed your interests, and I really like talking to people like you, people that aren't scared to do that.
Well, it helps that my first job was one that made money, so I could then follow the next interest.
Yeah, for sure.
If your first job doesn't make a lot of money, it's a lot harder to switch to, say, being an entrepreneur, because you need money.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson, founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering is Teach the Geek to Speak. It's a public speaking course. You can learn more about it at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Laurie.
Bye-bye.